My first home visit I did was with a family living behind the Walmart on 146, and it was a mom, her 3 kids, her brother's wife, their 3 kids, in a 2-bedroom apartment. She was sharing 1 bedroom with her 3 children, 1 severely disabled. And I left that home visit and cried in my car and called my mom. Because I had I had the biggest reality check I had in my life. I'm so blessed that I got to grow up in a home that my parents built. I got to pick the color purple for my bedroom. And here I am talking to a mother who's doing all that she can. She's working, she has these beautiful children. And here I was talking to her about this next opportunity for her to purchase a home through Habitat. And I'm so grateful that she was ultimately selected and I was able to then work with her for, it's funny, I still see her to this day in my new role. She's an RN and she comes and does work with one of our residents at Abby's house. Yeah, Fabiola, hey, Rukia, I love you both so much. So it's just, again, I think about how, I cried in my car and called my mom about, I just didn't know the state of the world. I was just naive. And so doing the service here, knowing that this was happening to a Walmart I would get bused to from here, that was happening right behind, that people were living like that. But actually it was in the affordable home off of Plantation Street, so yay.
Thank you. I think for me, my difficulties actually started before in the application discernment process. So I'm first generation Salvadoran American, and I grew up with a single parent, 2 moms. So you think of the Pursuit of Happiness story, if you've seen that film, but it's with my mom and she has 2 kids. And so I was growing up, and there were a lot of challenges and barriers, but honestly, the grace of God, I had enough people see me, and my mom did all that she could to provide good educational experiences. And so then junior summer, after my immersion experience, where I got to see realities, I'm from El Salvador, right? My family, my mom migrated when she was 6 months pregnant with me, and we arrived, I was brought into this world 3 months later. And then when I went to Nicaragua to see the realities of people who, just like me, share in that divine image and that inherent goodness, and I realized that just how lucky I was, but at the same time I was like, I got to see the world without my family lens. And so I thought, I want to experience as close as I can, solidarity with my family. And so to have to explain to your mom and your dad that I'm going to migrate to a context further south than where you involuntarily, for better opportunity, migrated north from, was really difficult. And then when they asked how much volunteering makes, I was like, well, not much. The Jesuit Volunteer Corps International, the stipend every month is $60 US. We're provided with housing and amenities, but $60 US, it does go further than here for sure, but it didn't go so far. And so for me, I found actually living 45 minutes southeast of Cusco to be one of the biggest challenges, because I would almost be able to code switch between being a United States citizen and when I was in those more rural indigenous areas where they spoke Quechua, to be an American, where my American identity was really put up front. And I realized that I can't just hide behind this, and I have to wrestle with what that means in the everyday. And so I had to be really mindful about what it meant to be a sort of visitor a stranger in a foreign land, and I had to be really sensitive about what I shared. Even though we grew up with some hardship, I realized that it looks different in different contexts, and so I really struggled with that. And yeah.
When I think about when I first went to Ireland after a very long visa process, just for some background, I grew up in Connecticut. I was born here in Worcester, but I had never traveled outside of New England. I had never been on an airplane. I was taking a big, huge jump of faith. And so when I got approved to go to Cork, I was thrilled, and when I first got off the plane, I remember thinking like, oh my goodness, this is really happening. So, and my phone didn't work. I was panicking the whole plane ride. I was like, oh, is this a good decision? And I was like, serving Jesus is a good decision, relax. And I smashed my head putting my luggage on the bus. So I was like, this is off to a really good start. But when I finally arrived in my community, I was so fortunate because I was living amongst a community of immigrant volunteers as well. So I met so many wonderful, truly lifelong friends from Poland, from Kenya, from Czech, and a million other countries. It was so wonderful, and they showed me how to live in Ireland. They helped me get my bus card and showed me where to shop, and with our very small living stipend as well. We made €250 a month for all of our expenses. So, and we were also living in community with people with intellectual disability through a program called L'Arche. Jean Vanier instituted that in France. So it's a really wonderful, wonderful opportunity. I would go back and do it again 100%. When I think of a time where I really had to dig deep, I remember when, just like getting there, and, sometimes when we get to places, we realize like, oh, this isn't what I pictured in my brain. And I kind of had a moment like that, and I just remember like trying to reflect and have time with Jesus and be like, I need a sign that I'm meant to be here because I'm not a quitter. So, and a little kind of peek into my role of what I did at L'Arche was you're living in the same house, you're providing basically like what a personal care assistant would do. So I did all of their medication, helping bathe them, clothe them, feed them. It was wonderful, wonderful service experience. And after I kind of had that huge moment of doubt, I went down to do my dear Sharon's routine, and part of her routine was applying cream to her feet. And I was just reminded of Jesus washing the feet, and I was like, this is exactly where I need to be. So.
So I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with the Peace Corps, so I think it's probably helpful to give a little bit of context. It was started by John Kennedy. He was on the campaign trail. He was sort of challenged by a university student why we spend so much money on war and we don't spend any on peace. And that idea kind of sat with him for a while. I think it was University of Michigan. And so March of 1961, they started the Peace Corps. It's a branch of the US government, and the idea is essentially to send sort of trained volunteers to parts of the world that ask for them. So if you're asking for people to help with after school activities at orphanages, or to help with health and sanitation, I was a community and organizational development volunteer in Bulgaria, and they move to different parts of the world that they see sort of a service need, and that people are called, and that the governments themselves ask for. I was in Bulgaria, which I'm not sure, does anybody really know what Bulgaria is? North of Greece, south of Romania, on the Black Sea coast, in the Balkans, what they call the Balkans, in the Balkan Mountains run right through the heart of it, the country. And so that's kind of Eastern Europe, right? They went into Eastern Europe after the fall of the communist/totalitarian states, in Bulgaria, the dictator, 45-year dictator Torozhevko stepped down in late 1989. They were in by like 91, 92. Like it was quick, right? By the time I went there in 2007, they were, it was their first year in the European Union. They had gotten in January 1st. I moved there in the summer of that same year. And they have held, until this year, one country, I don't want to poverty shame, they have been the poorest country in the European Union. And it's been kind of a struggle for them to figure out their place in it. And it was fascinating for me. I'm very interested in a lot of things, but just generally. But as somebody who studied management and business, these sort of transition economies from a planned economy where the state owned everything and dictated everything to figuring out their place in a more open economy was fascinating to me. But there was still, issues of very deep poverty. Particularly, it was 9 million people when communism ended. It's about to drop under 6 million today. So the brain drain continues, the difficulties continue. And I remember, it's not necessarily something that was a difficulty for me, but it was fairly interesting. I'd been there for about a year and a half, and they kept moving us to smaller and smaller locations because they figured that people had been moving out of villages. Just anywhere in the world this is happening, right? Out of rural communities into bigger cities. This is happening in the US, this is happening in Bulgaria, it's happening all over, right? People are just urbanizing. And so they kept moving us to sort of justify, they're in the European Union, but we're gonna send you, I was in a town of about 8,000 people. And they were looking at this village near me, and so the Mitko, the guy who's in charge of community and organizational development, he comes to my site, we get in the car, we drive down to this village, we're supposed to meet the mayor. He wasn't there, long story on that. Anyways, and I've been to this village, I've been helping teach English to this Roma village there. And they had expressed interest, and so we're like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And I saw Mitko, who was born and raised in Bulgaria, sort of staring, almost gawking at the poverty in a village in his own country. And that was really fascinating. And I'd been there, and it had just been part of my day-to-day experience that I had kind of gotten used to. It was just kind of fascinating to see how it didn't feel like the home he knew it to be, right? And I don't know, that story sort of comes to my mind. Another thing that I did grapple with, I don't know if you all felt this way as well, but people would often ask why I was there. I don't know if there's any 1990s Britpop fans in the room, but there's Pulp has a song called Common People, and there's the line essentially, if you want to live like common people, right? But if you called your dad, he could stop it all. Meaning, you can go home back to your Western comforts at any time. And I did sort of grapple with that, to be frank, and that was one of the hardest things, is how much am I a tourist of this poverty, right? So that was something I just psychologically had to okay.
Tyler, thank you so much for saying that, and also for explaining what the Peace Corps is about. Maybe as a follow-up question, I would like to ask all three of you to explain what your organization is, and the variety of opportunities that there may be. Maybe Tyler, you can start by saying, is the Peace Corps a program that is open for any country outside the United States or certain regions, and what type of opportunities for engagement with local nations and communities are there?
Sure. So in its existence, there have been about 300,000 volunteers in over 130 countries. Currently, though, there's about 2,600. Which is less than half when I was a volunteer, about 7,000, which was half of its peak, which was around 15,000. And they're in, I think, about 58 countries. We're frankly thankful it still exists with a lot of the government spending cuts.